Hello listeners, we are back again, this time with a new guest, that's Dr. Robert Newman. He's based in Marblehead in Massachusetts. I'm not going to tell you what's so special about him, I'll let him tell you that. We just start off by saying that he has been studying Goa since 1978-79.
That's when I first actually came here, but
Okay.
I began a few years earlier looking at library material in Australia when I was living there. But there was very little material available, I must say.
Before you tell the story,
Yeah, that's all.
I want you to start with the beginning.
Yeah.
When you first came to Goa,
Yeah.
that's a Goa many of us of our generation knew. What did you encounter? What did you see?
Okay, I was working in Lucknow as a Peace Corps volunteer. I was about 22 years old, and because of some events in my past, I had a desire to see Goa. So when I had a vacation, I decided to come to Goa, and I came by steamer from Bombay and arrived here. It was November of 1965, and so things were extremely different from what we see around us now. And I'm sure those of the listeners who were alive at that time will definitely remember what it used to be. It was a beautiful place, very beautiful place, but maybe economically it wasn't so beautiful for some people. But I remember that there was I never saw another tourist the whole time I was here. I just stayed about a week. I was just a tourist at the time, of course. And the Mandavi Hotel was the only hotel, but I couldn't afford to stay there. So I wound up staying in the Circuit Bungalow.
Circuit House.
Circuit House, yeah, up on Altino. And just exploring around. There was no guidebook for me. There was nobody to tell me what to do. But I took a bicycle and went out to Old Goa, went to Miramar, and met some of the Goans that I'd met on the ship. And we went to Kalangut together, and I remember not a single person on the whole beach. It was just a beautiful long beach with grass on the dunes, and we had a picnic there, and then it was a bit late, so we just slept in the dunes there by the beach and woke up in the morning and came back to Panjim. So that was the Goa that I saw, and you know, it still had a definite Portuguese flavor, although there were no Portuguese around. And I thought I must somehow come back to this place. It was so different from Lucknow, where I lived, very crowded, full of energy, and Goa was peaceful, quiet, no crowds whatsoever. So I decided somehow I'll come back. So that's the original story.
Two additions, the tickets you told us about, the ferry tickets and the Miramar Beach.
Yeah, Miramar Beach. I took a bicycle there. Most of whatever you see there now, all the houses, after Kampal, there was nothing there. And just fields, and the road was there. And at the end, there was a pine forest. It's still there today, as I'm sure everybody knows. And there was a little, like cook shack, you can call it there. You could get some fish and beer. That's about it. And so I rode out there, looked at the beach. It was very deserted, nobody there, maybe some fishermen. And I had a beer and some fish, and I felt really sleepy. Crows were calling, you know, pine tree in the breeze they were blowing, and I fell asleep sitting in a chair. And when I woke up, there was a man tapping me on the shoulder, and he said, "Excuse me, are you Japanese?" I was like, "What?" And I think he was looking for some Japanese people in the mining business, but he didn't really recognize who was Japanese and who wasn't. So that was an experience there. And then Miramar and
the tickets.
The tickets, yeah. When I took the ferry across from Panjim to Beijing, so the tickets were still printed in Portuguese, little pink tickets printed in Portuguese. So I thought, yeah, the old era is still, still going on a bit. The Indian Army used to lower the flag at 5 o'clock, I think, every afternoon, or maybe, 5 o'clock.
Outside the Secretariat?
Yeah, outside the Secretariat.
Probably the Goa police.
You had to stand.
You had to stand. Probably the Goa police, not the Indian Army. I don't know.
Maybe. I think
in
what
our
I
time
saw,
it was
I don't know, but I remember one Sardarji there.
I see.
So I don't think he was in the Goa
I
police,
see.
but I can't swear to that. But okay, yeah, that's the
But
story.
more interesting is your work on Goa. You know, I mean, you have studied Goa. There are two books which you are coming out with during this
Right,
trip,
right.
and I mean, many of us are really impressed by the kind of work you've done. How did you get involved in Goa? What made you choose Goa as a second place for research?
Well, first of all, as I just said, I liked the place and I wanted some excuse to come back because I had been working in North India and it's a difficult climate. And I thought also, if life is a row of pinball machines, you don't want to put all your coins in one machine, so just try different things, learn about different places. I was working in Australia, and Australia was becoming a very multicultural society at the time. And so they were dealing with the problem of what kind of education do you need for the kids who are growing up in a multicultural society? Are you going to just focus only on the majority culture, or are you going to include different groups and so on? So as that was a relevant topic at the time in Australia, and I had to have a relevant topic in order to get the money to come to Goa and do the research. So I thought, I can combine like Goan education and this multicultural issue. How do Goans learn about their own culture? What kind of texts do they have which would include everybody, or how do they do it? I was just interested to know what kind of education and what education provided in the way of cultural knowledge. And when I came here, I had this plan, right? I had this plan, and I went to see Bonfilio de Cruz, who was in the education department, a senior person. And right away he told me, oh, well, in Goa right now, it's a very touchy issue about culture and mixture of cultures and religions and languages and castes. So basically we don't touch it in school. Bang, my whole project fell down. And then I thought, but there are Goans. It exists. Goa exists, and there are people called Goans. How do they identify themselves? Like, they definitely know who are non-Goans, so obviously they have an idea who are Goans, but how do they get that picture? So then I started to think about what to do, and that's how these books grew, from that moment when my project fell apart. But I thought, but there is a cultural person called a Goan. How do they become that? And so I started to look into that.
Your first paper and most wide-based paper is in part 2, in book number 2 actually. It's called Goa, the Transformation of an Indian Region. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
And that paper kind of explains what Goa is in a way it was not understood before in the 80s. Could you give us a gist of what you're saying there?
Well, that paper was based more on observations plus reading, and especially reading of newspapers, but also interviews with people over many months and maybe a year or so. And I thought that nobody up to that point had really said that, okay, after the Portuguese left, Goa started to transform really quickly. It was going from basically a traditional society with a colonial overlay to a bourgeois capitalist society based on money more. So, but nobody had written about it in that way, and I wanted to explain to people the background of the place that I was going to write about in more detail, but in order that it would be published somewhere. But this was the only kind of descriptive piece on Goa that I wrote without a specifically anthropological framework. It was just description of how Goan society was changing in different areas, in business, mining, tourism, etc., etc.
It's a very insightful paper, and it offers a very broad understanding of Goa. But you wrote this while you were in Australia teaching in La Trobe University.
That's right. Yeah.
And
After I came back from my first period in
Yeah.
Goa. Yeah.
And in La Trobe, you were working in education,
Right, in education.
while in Lucknow, you started off as a Peace Corps volunteer.
Yeah, as a Peace Corps volunteer, you are not doing any kind of research, you are just
Yeah.
working. And then I went home, and then when I was doing my PhD, I had to do research. So I went back to Lucknow, and I spent another year doing educational research. I studied 3 types of primary schools, a village primary school out in the villages, then a Muslim maktab in a village also, and then as a kind of contrast, middle class, you can say upper middle class English language school run by the Christian Brothers in Lucknow city. So to see the contrast between the education that the city upper middle class kids got and the kids in the maktab and the kids in the village school, it was a very big contrast.
And in the Peace Corps, what kind of work were you all doing?
Well, this is, yeah, we were supposed to be chicken men, and we were supposed to be spreading knowledge about poultry, but it wasn't very successful, because the U.S. government didn't really understand India. So they had sent a number of people to Punjab, but at that time there was no Haryana, it was part of Punjab. So the people who were living in Haryana got people, they provided some knowledge, and people started raising chickens. And they could sell all those chickens and eggs in Delhi. And also even in Haryana, a lot of people, especially Sikhs, they ate chicken and they ate eggs. So it was a very successful project. So in Washington, some genius said, oh, we'll spread these all over India. So they sent us to UP, where almost everybody was vegetarian. Okay,
I see,
so
I see.
it was a joke.
I see.
And we were stuck, and you could kind of help some rich people to start a small-scale poultry farm to supply to maybe upper-class people who ate meat and eggs. But that really wasn't why we were there. So, but I was sent to an adult literacy institution just outside Lucknow, and so I worked in that and got involved with the village in other ways, but with chickens were just really non-starter.
Whatever, we learn from our mistakes, so I mean it's fine.
Well, I think the U.S. government didn't learn from its mistakes.
So anyway, you after your first paper, you wrote a lot on the sociology of religion.
I wrote a lot on that.
On the sociology of religion, if that's the right term.
On Goa,
Yeah, on Goa.
Yeah.
And why did you see this as an important field to write on?
Well, because when I started looking at what we can say, what works in anthropology existed at the time, we're talking about the 70s,
Yeah.
there was almost nothing, really almost nothing. There was a nice book about Goa written by a professor in Portugal, Raquel Soeiro de Brito, and it was a beautiful book with a lot of pictures, nice maps and all that, but it was basically a part of a big survey team that the Portuguese government sent just before the 1961. So, but it wasn't really anthropology as such, it was more maybe geography or something like that. And that was the Portuguese had written a lot of like travel or descriptions, but they just limited themselves to saying, well, these are the languages that people speak, these are the castes that you can find, these are the religions that you find, there are some tribes and so on. Like they divided Goa into so many little parts that you had to wonder, is there anything such as a Goan? I mean, there's all these groups and groups.
Yeah.
Who is a Goan here? So, but when as I said before, there was a definitely strong Goan identity. So obviously people didn't really pay attention to all those little groups, although of course they are important, but in some level people said, yeah, we are Goan. But how did that happen? And that was interesting to me. And so I thought, well, there isn't really much written. And those few people who had written something resembling anthropology, they were not familiar with general anthropology literature that existed in the West, you could say, and or even in India. There were many Indian anthropologists who plugged into the general anthropological framework, but on Goa there was just about nothing.
And then came Asolna. So when did you stay in Asolna? This was 87 or so?
Yeah, 80, we came in 86, at the end of 86 until 87. So that was the third visit. I also came in 82. I was staying in Santi Inish,
yes.
and then in Asolna. Then I came a few more times as well after that. So it's a long association.
You know many people here. You got many friends. Your acknowledgements
I like
mentioned.
Goa very much. Yeah.
And what was the response then? Did people find it strange that why is this foreigner coming to study us? Were they trusting?
No, yeah, I think, you know, during the 80s when I was here more, I mean, you had this big hippie kind of wave that hit Goa. And at first, you know, people thought, this guy is one of those hippies, you know, and you have to kind of persuade them, no, I'm not a hippie, you know, I'm a university professor and I'm here to do something, not to just sit on the beach and smoke dope, you know.
Right.
So but that didn't really, I didn't have any really big problem about it. And at first people didn't want to rent us a house because they thought, you know, we'll be smoking dope or having big parties or anything. And you know, you have to sort of persuade them that, no, you're a serious guy and you're going to leave when you say you're going to leave. You're not going to occupy their house or something. So, but really, there were no problem. But once I was working, no, I mean, never. Anybody was very suspicious or gave me a lot of trouble. Nobody.
I see.
Yeah.
Reading you is a lot of fun because, you know, when you talk about your sociology, it's almost as if you're telling a story. What I found particularly interesting was this paper which talks about the Goa at the movies, as you call it.
Yeah.
So can you elaborate on?
Well, yeah, it's a paper called Goa at the Movies, but it's not about Goans who go to see movies. It's about the image of Goa in Bollywood movies. So I watched for this paper, I watched I think 17 or 18 Bollywood movies which had Goa as a background. Yeah. And you know, I would say there were two main things that I would say. One is that Goa was not presented in a very good light in terms of the Goans. Goa as a place is shown as a paradise, and often they showed other parts of the world and called it Goa, Mauritius or Thailand or someplace.
And just called it Goa.
Yeah, and this is all happening in Goa. It's all completely imaginary stuff, you know, like Panjim railway station.
I see.
Where's that? It doesn't exist, but you see it in the movies. And, you know, Vasco da Gama was a big landlord, and they named the town after him.
I see.
And, you know, this kind of amazingly non-historical stuff. But they show Goa, the place, as a most beautiful place. But they show the Goans in a pretty negative light, I would say. In the paper, I go into it more. I don't think, you know, we can go into every little detail here. But what my point of it is that the result has not been extremely good for Goa. That, you know, excuse me, you have I think something like 2.7 or 3 million Indian tourists coming every year.
It's growing now.
And why are they coming here? Are they very interested in Indo-Portuguese history? I don't think so. Are they into swimming and lying on the beach? I don't think so. But what they are coming for is what they see in the movies. And that's a kind of freedom to do whatever you like. You know, kuch bhi karo, kisi ko farak nahi padta. So, you know, that's a line from a movie.
I see.
But that isn't Goa. That's not the Goa that you and I know. True. I mean, Goa is pretty conservative, right? And it's just not Goa, but that's the Goa they show, and I would say that this is a direct result. That's why you got so many people coming to Goa, because, and then there's the hotels and so on. The facilities are there for the people, but the Goa that they expect is probably not the Goa that really exists. So this is the point of my paper.
Another one called Orientalism for Kids, in
Yeah.
that you link your hobby of stamp collecting with understanding the picture the Portuguese portrayed or sought to portray of Goa.
Yeah.
A little bit on that.
Well, it's not, yeah, that paper is about three, about British India, French India, and Portuguese India, and how each of those countries portrayed what they wanted to portray of their, rule, the part of India that they ruled. And so the Portuguese presented it basically as part of Portugal, and everything that was shown was to do with Portuguese history or the Portuguese history in Goa, connected to Portugal, Estado da India. It was a special part of the Portuguese, you can say empire, but it wasn't an emperor. But actually, out of the three countries, England, France, and Portugal, only Portuguese showed any actual Indian person that was, I forgot, I think Father Joseph Vaz and one or two others. So they were the first Indians to appear on stamps, I think, by the colonial regime, although India became independent before Goa was liberated. So perhaps India had showed Mahatma Gandhi and some others on the stamps, but in terms of the colonial regime, England and France never showed any Indian on their stamps. So it was just a paper to show how you could look at history and culture and colonialism through stamps. It's my hobby,
You are a very avid stamp collector.
Yeah, I'm still doing it.
How many?
Oh no, this is a secret.
Okay, tell us about your photography if you can.
Okay, well, I don't know what to say. I like photography. I've done a lot, and I've had a few exhibitions here and there.
Numbers.
Number of what?
Of photographs on Goa.
On Goa, a lot.
Thousands.
Maybe hundreds. I don't know. I've never counted them, but every time I came to Goa, I took a lot of photographs. So must be in the hundreds, way from 65 up to. I just took a few photos the other day. So so it was.
Of course, the paper which we are describing, we cannot do justice to it in a few words. But I think it goes very deep into explaining, the issues and the subjects and the topics in the stamps. That you do a good job in analyzing and putting it across.
Oh, thanks. It was just an idea that came to me like a flash one day, and I said, yeah, and I saw the whole paper right there, and it was one of the few times in my life that I didn't have to like burn the midnight oil thinking, what am I going to write, how am I going to do it? But this one just came to me bang like that. I could do that, and I just did it maybe in a couple of weeks. I wrote the whole thing. It was very clear.
The topics of your papers are always very provocative and catchy in that sense.
Maybe.
So no, and this time like the talk that you're giving while you're in Goa, it's called biryani and bibinka.
Yeah.
So you have to convince everyone that they're not going to talk about food, but something more serious than that.
I'm not going to talk about food. It was just a symbol of Muslims and the Catholics. So I'm going to talk about. It's my overview of the whole thing. I mean, this is the last thing that I've written. It might be the last, who knows. And so how do I see Islam and Catholicism as being absorbed into India, like becoming Indian religions, not foreign religions. So that's what that's about.
Yeah.
And I just chose the title because, something a bit catchier than,
The other catchy title is, of course, Dev Bare Kuru, thank you. Shukriya, Dhanyavad, Obrigado. Goa is a multilingual society.
Yeah.
Explain.
Explain it. Well, this is a paper, it's about language, but I'll confess to you and to the audience that I'm no linguist. I'm not a person who studied linguistics in any big way. So it's not a professional paper as such, but it's a paper about my view of language in Goa after all these years, like about 40 years. So how it's about that Goa is really a multilingual society. I mean, we have countries like Australia, Canada, USA, with a lot of immigrants who speak a lot of languages. So, but the main language is only English. Like, you can't really go to the court, you can't go to the police station, you can't go to school and speak any other language. You have to know English. And in the society, if you go to any store or, you know, place of amusement, anything, you must speak English. So it's not really a multilingual society, though you can find at least 100 languages spoken in a place like New York, but the English language is the only one. Unlike Goa and India as in general, but especially Goa, that people use different languages in different contexts every day, and you can hear it all around you. Somebody speaks Konkani here, English there, Portuguese there, Marathi there, you know, and there are a few others like Urdu, like Malayalam, like Kannada.
Yes.
So there are, and nobody feels that this is at all strange, that you switch in one conversation from Konkani to English, maybe some Portuguese. So it's a really multilingual society. And I was pointing it out in that paper that, you know, multilingual societies where you use the language, you use the language which is most convenient and most advantageous to you at the time. Like if I see the, you know, that Pawala who comes around early in the morning and he doesn't know English, so I would speak to him in Hindi. If he doesn't know, you know, another language, you could try that. So it's useful for you. When I went to study the temples in Fatorpa and in other places, well, I'm sure many of the Hindu priests there spoke some English, but I thought if I speak Hindi, they will accept me more because I feel more close to them. And so I used Hindi, not even though, you know, I could speak English maybe, but I felt they will feel that I'm more sympathetic to them if I speak Hindi, and I did. When I spoke Portuguese to some of the older folks, they felt more close to me than if I tried to speak English and they said, this is another hippie coming around, you know. So I tried to use the language which is, you know, most suitable for the occasion, and I think that's what everybody does in Goa. According to where you are and what you want to project, that's the language you choose.
Even if this embarrasses you, you actually are quite a linguist, right? Hindi.
Maybe.
No,
okay.
Hindi, a little bit of Hindi. You know, when my son gives difficulty in studying Hindi or studying Konkani, I point to the 16th century and say that if Thomas Stephen could master Konkani in that day and age, or in the 21st century, if Robert Newman could master Hindi, a little bit of a demonstration.
अरे मैं क्या बोलूँ आपसे
एक
मुझे
तो
मालूम
भी
नहीं।
सेंटेंस एक तो भी सेंटेंस बोलो ना देखा
मैं तो बोल रहा हूँ मगर हमेशा जब लोग पूछते हैं कि हाँ हिंदी बोल दीजिए मुझे कुछ ख्याल नहीं आता कि मैं क्या बोलूँ.
So the Hindi you learnt is more Hindustani?
Yeah, Hindustani. It's not really, you know, Shuddh Hindi as they say.
Urdu influenced?
Urdu influence. I learned in Lucknow, right? So आपकी तबीयत कैसी है? मैंने सुना है कि आपके दुश्मनों की तबीयत जरा नासाज है. This type of very flowery kind of stuff.
Ornate language.
Yeah, ornate, yeah. But I really like that language, beautiful language.
And you picked up Japanese along the way?
Yeah, that was in my earlier days, in my callow youth.
Amazing.
Because I was an exchange student in Japan when they had a scholarship from the high school, and I happened to get it. It didn't mean that you would definitely go to Japan. It could be anywhere, but I happened to go to Japan. I really liked Japan.
At what age?
Japanese, 16.
16.
So when I came home and I went to university, I studied Japanese for 4 years.
Wow.
So that was, you know, a part of my life, which now kind of in the past because I don't really use it, but I can still, you know, survive in Japan without any problem.
Of course, you have a gift with languages, but the point you're making about languages in Goa is also very important because it means so much to understand that we are multilingual. We have to cope with all these languages. It's a reality. It's a challenge. It's also an asset, probably. No, that we could use these languages. But when we think, we are mostly thinking like one language, one official language. It's not like, you know, how could we work on it? So it does have a lot of implications for how we see ourselves and how we.
Yeah, I think the world is globalizing, as they say, but I don't think globalization means that there will eventually only be one thing. I think that it means that we all should know more than one. So it's not just like, okay, I'm an American and I speak English, so a lot of people in the world speak English, so I think, well, I don't have to know any other language because they'll all speak English. I think it's a big mistake. You know, we should learn other languages, and that's being globalized rather than only sticking to English or one dominant language, maybe Chinese in the future. That, you know, that's not globalization. That's just kind of imposing one thing on everybody. But globalization, I think, should mean that we become globalized. We get out of our little shell and try to be more international, try to communicate with others.
You've made this point that Goa doesn't represent itself most of the time because it's small, because it's on the periphery.
Yeah, especially in that movie paper, I was saying that, you know, why, if Goa was big, I think they would have objected to Bombay showing Goa like this, but they're small and the number of people is small, so they don't have much say in how people are representing them. But it's a shame in a way how they represent Goa.
But in recent years, there has been an uptake in a number of studies done in sociology, for example. Could you mention some of the work being done in Goa and how it could be taken forward?
Well, there are a lot of people who, you know, I knew, so maybe I was the first person who did it. But after that, there was Alito Siqueira, who's a really good scholar. I think he hasn't published a lot, but he has a great knowledge. And then there was Alexander Hahn from Germany, who lives in Arizona in the States right now. He also did publish. There's Raghuraman Trichur, who from Kerala, but he also is in the States. Then Rosa Maria Perez, a very dear friend of mine and from Portugal. And she has written a lot. She also worked in Gujarat, so she's familiar with India wider than just Goa. Susana Sardo worked on music. She's still around doing work. And then after that, there's another generation, and they're coming up, but I don't know who among them is going to be you know, prominent in the future. It depends. Sometimes people like myself, I started in Lucknow and then switched to Goa. Somebody may start in Goa and switch to somewhere else, so we might not hear of them. There was a lady from Portugal, Claudia Pereira, who worked on Gaude. And, but now she's left Goa, and I mean left the Goa subject, and she's doing other things now. So like that, people come and go. But you know, as I'm sitting there most of my life in a little town in Massachusetts, I'm not aware of who are the up-and-coming young people here. There was another person, Bernadette Gomes, who lives here in Goa. She was an excellent anthropologist, one of the best. But she also dropped out, you can say, but I always hope that she will come back and publish some of her work.
If she's listening, maybe she
if
takes
you're
this
listening,
as a hint.
You should remember this.
So along the way, I mean, you were in Australia, and then you moved back to Massachusetts.
Right. Yeah.
These are both two worlds very different away from Goa.
Very different. Very
so,
different. Yeah.
like, you know, we almost thought at one point that Dr. Newman had stopped researching Goa.
Yeah.
And then you came back with a bang. And
yeah, what happened was that, you know, I left my university in Melbourne to go back to the States. My father passed away and left me the house which I grew up in, and I had to choose whether sell it and stay in Australia forever or go back and have a different life. And I didn't really know, you know, what life it would be, but I chose that. So I went back, and after that, I was, you know, struggling to find my feet a bit. I began teaching English as a second language to mainly people from the former Soviet Union. And it was not only teaching English, but kind of introducing them to American culture, in some way to India, because they were kind of stuck in the Soviet Union all their lives and weren't allowed to travel. So they had not been anywhere outside. So they were interested in what I had to say, and So I've been doing that for a long time. But I still kept writing, and I had a lot of material that I had left over from my work. So I kept writing more papers, and then I went to conferences in America, and I was, trying to publish something. But so about let's see, about 10 or 11 years passed, and I hadn't done anything. I'm living in this town, small town in Massachusetts. If the word Goa doesn't ring a bell at all, I mean, you say, where did you do your work? I did in Goa. Where's that? Nobody has any idea. So
It could be on Mars.
yeah, it could be. And so I felt very isolated, and I did publish a book, as you remember, in 2000. It was called Of Umbrellas, Goddesses, and Dreams.
Other India Press in Mapsa.
Yeah, Other India Press, right. And but I published it, and that's it. I never heard a word. Like, who read it? I heard from the publisher that it was published. I got a few copies, but I mean, there was no feedback at all.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know.
Even the internet was not there.
Yeah,
not
the
strong
internet
enough
wasn't there, but I didn't know if anybody was reading it or what. Nothing. And suddenly in 2002, Rosa Maria Perez, who I mentioned before,
From Portugal.
contacted me and invited me to a conference in Portugal. And so I went there, and there I found that everybody had read this book.
Wow.
And I was like stunned. It was, it was a really emotional experience that they asked me to sign the book. And just a few days before, I was sitting there in Massachusetts thinking, maybe nobody ever read this book,
One thing leads to the other. It's
yeah.
like, you never
and so
know.
after that, I got involved, and it came back, and I was going to different conferences, came to Goa more often again, and then, like this.
You know what I like about
And
you?
I could say to the audience that this man has encouraged me a lot. He has encouraged me a great amount.
I think the editor should cut this part. But
No, they
but
shouldn't.
that apart, what I really appreciate about you, Robert Newman, is that you can take a scrap of paper or an old book and convert it into an academic paper in the most interesting and kind of storytelling fashion. For example, this paper, Colonial Official to Anthropologist, Fitting In.
Yeah, fitting in. Yeah, that was a very interesting experience. That when I finished working in Goa in 1979, I went to Lisboa to try to find, documents or books, and also to interview people who had been in Goa, so on. So one day I was, I forgot the name of this place, not Shiado, but one of those.
They have a lot of second-hand or
Yeah, there
antiquarian
were a lot
bookshops.
of second-hand bookstores. I think Shiado it was.
Sure.
And so I was in this old bookstore, and the guy was really grumpy. If you ask him, do you have this, like this, just an old grumpy fellow. And so I was looking through this box of what they call ephemera. It means like not books, but just kind of
Knickknacks. Whatever.
mishmash of reports and magazines and I don't know what, pamphlets maybe. So I found this report from 1897 written by Francisco Leal and, Fernando Leal, who was an official there in Asolna, Kunkuling, and Veli. And,
In the very village you were
in
studying?
the very village I was studying, he was living in Asolna, and he wrote it about, the conditions there. It was like a report, but I kept it, I bought it for like, I don't know, $2 or something. That old guy was almost reluctant to sell it, although what was he going to do with it? And he was there to sell stuff, but he didn't want to sell it. Anyway, I bought it. And then I kept it at home for a long time and didn't even think about it. Then many years later, I started reading it, and I realized this is really interesting, how he lived in Asolna, and what he saw of the village and the problems that were associated. But then I thought, yeah, I can compare it, and that's why I called my paper Fitting In. But he was the boss, basically. He was the official in charge of that area, but I was just a visiting anthropologist.
Yeah.
I couldn't ask anybody to do anything. Just have to be polite and get along with people. but he was ordering them to do this and ordering them. And then he found these people tricky. And he mentioned that, you know, certain people in the village were tricky, chicaneira, he called them. But, you know, why wouldn't they be tricky if you are trying to, you know, get their land or make them pay this or, you know, and they don't want you there. So, but when I was there, the very descendants, maybe the grandchildren of those very tricky people were the most helpful and cooperative people that I could imagine. So I could see that, you know, the position of an official was very different from the position of a visiting anthropologist. So, but I had to fit in my way, and he had to fit in his way. So it was really an interesting thing to read what he wrote.
From your writing, I get the impression that contrary to Samuel Huntington, you don't believe in a clash of civilizations. You believe that people can work together, can live together, you know, regardless of our differences, whether it's religion or language or caste.
Well, I'm afraid that what I believe is that there shouldn't be a clash of civilizations, but it's not entirely sure that there won't be in the future. There are two forces in the world, I would say, those who want to include everyone and those who want to exclude everyone else. So which one of those is going to win? I may not live to see, maybe the kids today may see, but it's a toss-up, I think. There are forces everywhere in the world, including my country, where people are, you know, trying to be exclusive. These are no good, these are no good, these are no good, only we are good. And then there's another force where say, yeah, everybody could cooperate, everybody could, you know, get along together, and let's do that. So it's a clash of civilizations only if you think those exclusivist people are right. Otherwise, I would say they are completely wrong, but that's my personal point of view.
You've done a difficult job of studying, you know, different aspects of Goa. So, you know, you studied Catholic Goa, you studied Hindu Goa, you studied rural and urban.
I would say I haven't studied Catholic Goa and Hindu Goa. I just studied Goa only. And Goa is mixed, you know, completely together in that way. So I don't find a Catholic Goa, I don't find a Hindu Goa, but Goa.
You don't believe in separating it and, you know, putting it in watertight divisions, of course.
No, there's no, Goa is the perfect example of how it's not watertight. So no, I don't believe in that. Of course, there are Hindus, there are Catholics, there are Muslims, there are, you know, those who don't believe anything. That's for sure, but as a society, Goa is a very good example of how people have come together over several centuries, and the culture has slowly mixed, and you can see it. The other day I went to the Zatra in Fatorpa, where Shanta Durga Kunkalikaran, and it's a Hindu temple, right? But you'll see a lot of Catholics there. So, you know, they are giving donations and getting receipts from the temple. It's the most perfect example of not Hindu Goa, not Catholic Goa, but Goa.
But probably this is what makes Goa a little bit complex to understand, and there's a lot of myths about Goa, as one of your papers talks about, myths old and new.
Yeah, there's been a lot of myths of Goa.
What are the myths?
Well, I mean,
the main ones.
The main ones, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is that, you know, Goa is the Rome of the Orient, and it's like this holy city. But at the same time, it was the, you know, the paradise for people who liked high living. I mean, it was full of, let's say, disreputable characters and easy living, a lot of luxury and so on. People came here to get rich. So they didn't come here to be very pious and religious. There were two myths at the time, back in the 16th century.
Both being myths, both of these being myths.
I mean, Goa was probably some kind of mixture of the religious with the luxury and materialistic things. So some people propagated one myth that it was the Rome of the Orient and so on. Others propagated that
it's a hedonistic paradise.
Yeah, hedonistic paradise, you can call it that. So that's one myth. Then in the 19th century, people like Richard Burton said that Goa was, you know, corrupt and low and, you know, kind of disreputable, and people were, you know, degraded in some way. this was the British travelers who came to Goa kind of looked down on it, as they often looked down on any Latin kind of life. It was a proper life, you know. So that was another myth of Goa as a kind of whole, that, you know, that it sunk to degradation. That's just, you know, some kind of mythology, definitely. And then you had, you know, after World War II, when the liberation movements were sweeping all around the world, you had the Portuguese myth that aqui é Portugal, and you had the Indian myth that, you know, Goa's being oppressed and this is a terrible government and everybody's dying to be part of India. So the Portuguese government and the Indian government were pushing their individual myths. So neither one of them was, I would say, extremely accurate. There was a little bit of truth in both of them. So then you had Goa as the hippie paradise, and, you know, let's do whatever you like and lie on the beach and smoke dope and, you know, drink feni and all that. And it was a myth around the world, maybe not in Goa so much, but Goa as the hippie paradise. And that's a myth completely, I would say. And then finally you had the Bollywood film myths, which we've already discussed. Yeah, so there were a bunch of them, and in none of these do you find really the Goans having something to say about it. It's all myths imposed from outside. So it would be nice if Goans could establish their own mythology, or at least their own picture of their own place, you know. And I think it's happening, especially in literature, but now I think a few films have come out, Goan films, not Bollywood films. So this is a really positive thing, I would say.
And any story that you remember which happened to you, the most unusual thing that you'd like to share with the audiences during maybe a myth that you were seen in while you were here?
A myth?
Yeah,
No,
or a stereotype or something of that sort?
Well,
Anthropology and shells?
you know, I can't think of something like right off the bat that would link this to mythology, but there's one thing that I can tell you a story.
Yeah.
That it was many years ago. I have a friend, but I had this friend also then, and my wife, who's from North India, Brahmin, Hindu Brahmin, of course, and this lady, Goan lady, Catholic lady. Three of us were sitting in the living room, just having a nice chat, you know, and maybe a cup of tea and talking. And I was thinking, you know, very pleasant occasion. Suddenly it came to me that, you know, our grandparents, the 6 grandparents of us, you know, how could they have had this conversation? And I thought, no way, you know, okay, the Goan Catholics were more accepting of others, but my Jewish grandparents wouldn't eat in anybody else's house. They wouldn't touch the plate. And they didn't have anybody as a friend who wasn't Jewish. Hindu Brahmin wouldn't be caught dead in a Catholic house sipping tea from somebody's cups, you know. So that was the grandparents' generation. And here, just in 2 generations, we were so comfortable and friendly. And I thought, yeah, you know, things really change. And so it's very possible that the world can change, you know, for the better. But will it happen? You know, nobody knows.
And on that point, and on this very optimistic note, we want to thank you on behalf of CCR TV for coming here, sharing so much. Wishing you all the best, hoping there's much more research, many more stories about Goa. And like I've always benefited from your amazing form of storytelling and also writing papers. May you have many more. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Rico. Thanks very much. Thanks.